everybody, this is Mr. Munson. We're in Unit 4 still, congruent triangles. So we're going to look at two different concepts here. Concept number 4, we're going to deal with isosceles triangles, and concept 5, corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Both of them are pretty straightforward, so let's get started. Make sure that you go back and review your vocabulary words. Make sure you understand what those terms are, isosceles triangle and corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So as I talk about them today in this video, it's no big deal. All right, here we go. 4.3, isosceles triangle theorem. Really pretty straightforward. Make sure that you understand this idea that in an isosceles triangle, there are two segments that are congruent, and we call those legs. So whenever I refer to them as legs, you just automatically know that they're congruent in an isosceles triangle. Now, going along with that, we have two base angles. The base angles are always opposite those legs. Now, I can't say this enough. Base angles have nothing to do with where their position is in the sense of the perspective of the triangle. If I turn this thing upside down and I mark these two congruent, the base angles are up here. Okay? They're just simply across from the congruent legs. It has nothing to do with them being at the bottom, at the base, or anything like that. Okay? Matter of fact, when I turn this thing upside down, the base side, the side that we call the base, is now on top, and it's the side other than the legs. All right, very simple. So let's take a look at this figure. We're given PR is congruent to PQ, and I want you to name the base angles. Okay? So go ahead and put me on pause. You can copy this into your notes. Go ahead and mark the drawing with the congruent information. See if you can identify which angles are the base angles. Put me on pause. Well, there I have PR and PQ are congruent. So the angles opposite those sides are the congruent sides. And so different ways that we can mark angles. We can draw like an arc, and whoops, we can draw an arc and put a single strike in it to identify if the angles are congruent. Any way we'd like to do it. All right. Now the isosceles triangle theorem basically says this: if I have a triangle where two sides are congruent, in other words, an isosceles triangle, then the base angles that are opposite them are congruent. Very simple. Okay? So basically, I've seen books call this the base angle theorem. Basically, it just says if you have an isosceles triangle, then the base angles are congruent. So in other words, if I, in this particular drawing with these particular letters, if AB is congruent to BC, then angle A is congruent to angle C. Okay? Those are the angles opposite the legs. All right, let's move on. All right, so go ahead and use this kind of reverse idea. You're given that the base angles are congruent, or you have a pair of angles that are congruent. See if you can discover what AC would be in this drawing. Okay, so go ahead and put it on pause, copy down the problem, come back and see if you get it right. Pretty easy stuff. Now I'm just going to go ahead and mark in the drawing. It tells me that AB is congruent, or AB is 8.5. So I'm just going to move that 8.5 down on the other side, but AB is 8.5. Now I know that for some people they're still struggling with where do I put the information. So obviously the 65 is an angle, so I put it in the crest of that angle. 8.5 is segment information, so I put it on the outside next to the segment. Okay, so now they're asking me, what is AC? What I notice is that since these two angles are the same, I'm going to draw an arrow from that angle to its opposite side, and I'm going to do the same from that angle to its opposite side to help my eyes visually see that it's AC that's equal to 8.5. All right, let's take a look at this one. I got to find X. Okay? So I see that those two sides are congruent. So this is what I know. First of all, I know by the triangle sum theorem that all the angles inside this triangle have to equal, their sum has to equal 180 degrees. Well, I got the 75 and I have the X. So what I'm going to do is, I note that the across from this side is that angle that's 75. I'm going to also note that there's another congruent side. That means that one has to be 75 as well. It's part of my problem solving skills of being able to take that the isosceles angle theorem, the one I just learned, and bring in information that wasn't given to me. So now I can simply write an equation that 75 plus 75 plus the x equals 180. Now there's different ways this problem can unfold, but that's a pretty good understanding of that problem. Okay? I'm going to leave solving that equation to another time. Now here's one that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but that's okay. You're up for it. We're just applying this simple idea that across from angles are congruent, or across from sides, congruent sides are congruent angles, and those things. So definitely look at this, the triad problem. This x and this y, even though they're different letters, I know that they're going to have to be the same value. So just think that through for a second and see if you can use some real high-level thinking here to figure out what the x and the y has to be given this in order with this information given. So go ahead and put me on pause and think that through, then come back and check with me, and I'll walk you through it if you got stuck. This is kind of how I go about doing it. I would know that the sum of the 40 and the x and the y have to equal 180. So I subtract away the 180, and that leaves me 140 degrees. Now I know that since these sides are congruent, then the angles opposite them are congruent. Get used to drawing those arrows where you point from a side to an angle or from an angle to a side. And so if the two have to share that 140 evenly, that's a simple 140 divided by 2. And that gives me both x and y equal 70. Okay, there we go. All right, let's move on to another one. All right, let's take a look at this triad problem, okay? So I've got 3 sides given, right? 7x plus 2, a 5x minus 1, a 7x plus 2, a 3x plus 7, and then those two angles are congruent, okay? So I see unknowns, so I'm going to have to write an equation, something, just some relationship between these things that, you know, could be solved and found to be x, okay? So if I'm looking for x. So think for a second, just put me on pause and think through, what is it that you know? Now here's a hint. We're not going to use every single piece here, right? There's enough information with 2 of the pieces to write an equation and solve for it. Big hint. Put me on pause and see if you can do it, and then come back and check your work. Well, there you have it. You know, if you think about it, those 2 angles are congruent, so I'm going to automatically, whenever I see that, I'm going to draw these arrows that point to their opposite sides to help me remember that these pieces are congruent. And if those pieces are congruent, then their measures are equal. So I wrote the equation you might have calculated to find out what the x was. And great, fantastic. I'm going to leave solving that to you and all that. Okay, let's move. All right, so let's take a look at this one. Now, again, it's another one of those problems where we actually have more information than we really need. We need to start adapting our eyes to see what it is that we really need, throw away the stuff we don't, okay? So see if you can do this one. This is, again, a problem solving. You got the idea base angles are congruent, if the sides are congruent, and all that stuff. So see if you can kind of filter through the mess of this problem and come up with an equation and then solve for the angle C. Put me on pause, come back and check to see what you got. Well, after realizing that because those 7s are congruent, I drew my arrows and pointed to those angles. That 4y is a big mix. I don't need that. So since those sides are congruent, the angles are congruent, that means their measures are equal. So I wrote the equation that represents that, right? These 2 angles are equal to each other. I found x is equal to 10. Now it's just a matter of me plugging it in to find the measure angle C, which is 3x plus 2. All right, that gives me 32. So C's 32, so hopefully B is 32. All right, so here we have 4.5. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Woo, look at how it's spelled congruent. All right, that's better, congruent with a G. All right, so anyway, basically corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Just basically says, hey, if I have 2 triangles that are congruent, their corresponding parts have to be congruent. Period, right? So if you think about it, it's just a real easy thing, right? And so instead of saying all that mess, I'm going to say Cpctc. Cpctc. So take a look at these 2 triangles off to the right here. I have 2 triangles here. These triangles, I don't know, are they congruent? Well, if you look at it, all their parts on the left-hand side have a matching part on the other side. The only thing that's different is the letters that make up the corners. These two triangles are congruent. So all the parts on the left triangle have a matching congruent part on the right. Change that real quick. So when that happens, when we know that these two triangles are congruent, we can write what we call a congruent statement. And basically, we're going to draw a statement between two triangles being congruent. Okay, we're going to say this triangle ABC is congruent to some other triangle. Standard form is to write the first triangle in alphabetical order. Okay, so that's the way I'm going to expect your answers in class. The very first triangle, the letters are in alphabetical order. Now the second triangle, the letters might not be in order. So you just need to match up. Notice that angle A has a single struck for its angle. So you look over to the right and you find D is the single struck spot or angle. So it goes in the first spot. Then you look at B, and B on the left has a triple struck. E has the triple struck there. And then C has the two strikes, so you match it up to F over on the other side. Now, certainly those letters D, E, F are in alphabetical order, but that's not what I was worried about. I wanted to make sure I matched up those angles on the left triangle to match with the right triangle. Okay? Now, so order is very important, and they all match up. And if you do this correctly, then the sides match up. If you look at AB in the left triangle, right, it has a double struck side. Come over here and I grab the first two letters here, DE. They should both have the double struck as well. Okay? Just take a look at that and make sure that works out. All right, so order matters. Writing it so that the corresponding parts don't line up correctly, completely wrong. You want to be careful about that. All right, so given an example like this, they give me that they give me the congruence triangle or congruent statement ABC is congruent to EGF. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up into the drawing and make the appropriate marks. So I see that A and E are in the same spot, so I'll mark those with congruent marks. Next up, I have B and G. And then finally, you go ahead and make the marks for C and F. And there you have it. That's for the angles. Now let's go back and do the sides. Now certainly we could look at A and B over here and make it so that E and G match up. So we could go up there to A and B and mark them. Let me show you an easier way. I'm going to go back up to the drawing and look over to the left drawing. I see A, and the angle there, A, has a single mark. So I'm going to go across to the opposite side, and I'm going to mark it congruent. With a single mark. Now those two, that angle on the side, are certainly not congruent, but over in the right-hand drawing, see the E angle has a single mark, so I'm going to go to the side opposite it and mark it congruent. And if you look down at your congruent statement, BC, this piece right here, is congruent to GF. And it's true in my drawing, okay? So I'm just going to go through the angles, look at the angle, and mark the side across from it with the exact same marks. So that one has double, so come over here to the 2, and the side across from it has double, and then go to the 3, and I'll go to the last side, mark it 3, and of course that means that one's 3. It's that simple to keep track of things. All right, so now let's take a look at writing a congruent statement. Okay, so go ahead and put me on pause, see if you can do this one, and just write a congruent statement. Remember, that's a triangle, blah, 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 is congruent to triangle, blah, blah, blah. Standard is this very first one that you write, letters are in alphabetical order, so I'll get you started. A, B, C, and then I'm looking to see what triangle that's congruent to. Remember, order matters. Put me on pause and see how you do. It's as easy as that. G, K, D. So I look at A. Look over, it's double struck, and so I go over to the angle on the right-hand side that's double struck, and it's G, so I stick it in the same spot. It's really that easy. Let's go ahead and do your do-it problems and get going, okay? Don't forget you had some other homework to do if you didn't finish those problems in class. Let me zoom in on these problems, and we're done. Excellent. See you next class.